Hi, this is the second day of spring. That's so good. And today we will have a heavy wind. Heavy wind. They said it said that we will have the wind at a speed of 100 kilometer an hour. So it's really big wind. Today we'll read a new novel, The Human Bondage, by W. Sumrest, Summerest Moham. So this is a new novel. I don't know I can finish it or not because I already read it in Chinese once. So in English one, I think it's pretty hard, not like Little Princess. Little Princess is easier, but we'll try. We'll see what will happen. If I have to check, 10 to 20, words in one page, then we'll change to something simple. Otherwise, we'll. Okay, let's go. Oh. Of Human Bondage by W. Moss Somerset Ham. I need to check the how to pronounce his name. Marmoset. Oh, Somerset.
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 Somerset. Oh, that's interesting. It means 马鞍 Somerset. Somerset means 有衬垫的马鞍。Oh, this name interesting. Oh, that's so interesting. Mom, like that's
Morgan.
Morgan, just
Morgan.
Morgan, but just mom. Somerset mom. I. The day broke green and dull. The clouds hung heavily, and there was a rawness in the air. There was a rawness in the air that suggested snow. That's interesting, this sentence. How say rawness? So in Chinese, rawness means not cooked. Not cooked. So this is a very interesting sentence. And there was a rawness in the air that suggested snow. A woman servant came into a room in which a child was sleeping and drew the curtain. She glanced mechanically. A stucco house with a portico. A stucco house. 哦，obstacle 粉饰灰泥墙，obstacle horse 粉饰灰泥墙，obstacle horse with a portico and went to the child's bed. Portico.
portico,
With a portico. With a portico, this means 廊柱。With portico and went to the child's bed. Wake up, Philip, she said. She pulled down the bedclothes, took him in her arms, and carried him downstairs. He was only half awake. Your mother wants you, she said. She opened the door of a room on the floor below and to a bed in which a woman was laying. I need to make it sure. Is it lying or laying? Lying.
lying,
Lying. A woman was lying. It was his mother. She stretched out her arms, and the child nestled by her side. He did not ask why he had been awakened. The woman kissed his eyes, and with thin small hand felt the warm body through his white flannel nightgown. To herself, "Are you happy, darling?" she said. His voice was so weak, her voice was so weak that it seemed to come already from a great distance. The child did not answer, but smiled comfortably. He was very happy in the large warm bed, with those soft arms around him. He tried to make herself smaller still as he cuddled up against his mother, and he kissed her sleepily, his ass, and was fast asleep. The doctor came forward and stood by the bedside. "Oh, don't take him away yet," she moaned. The doctor, without answering, looked at her gravely. "No one would be allowed to keep the child much longer." The woman kissed him again, and she passed her hand down his body till he came to his feet. She passed her hand down his body till she came to his feet. She held the right foot in her hand and felt the 5 small toes, then slowly passed her hand over the left one. She gave a sob. "What's the matter?" said the doctor. "You are tired." She shook her head, unable to speak, and the tears rolled down her cheeks. The doctor bent down. "Let me take him." She was too weak to resist his wish, and she gave the child up. The doctor handed him back to his nurse. "You'd better put him back in his own bed." "Very well, sir." The little boy, still sleeping, was taken away. His mother sobbed no broken-heartedly. What? The monthly nurse tried to quiet her, and presently, from exhaustion, the crying ceased. The doctor walked to a table on the other side of the room, upon which, under a towel, lay the body of a stillborn child. The body of a stillborn child. He lifted the towel and looked. He was hidden from the bed by a screen, but the woman guessed what he was doing. Was it a girl or boy? She whispered to the nurse. Another boy. The woman did not. The moment the child's nurse came back, she approached the bed. Master Philip never woke up, she said. There was a pause. Then the doctor felt his patient's pause once more. I don't think there's anything I can do just now, she said. I will call again after breakfast. I'll show you out, child's nurse. They walked downstairs in silence. In the hall, the doctor stopped. You sent for Mrs. You sent for you sent for you sent for Mrs. Carter's brother-in-law, haven't you? Yes, sir. Don't you know at what time he will be here? No, sir. I'm expecting a telegram. What about the little boy? I should think she'd be better out of the way. Miss Miss Walkin Miss Walkin said she'd take him, sir. Who's she? She's his godmother, sir. Do you think Miss Carey will get over it, sir? The doctor shook his head. It was a week later. Philip was sitting on the floor in the drawing room at Miss Wilkins' in Onslow Garden. He was an only child and used to amusing himself. The room was filled with massive The room was filled with massive furniture, and on each of the sofas were three big cushions. There was a cushion, too, in each armchair. All these he had taken, all these he had taken, and with the help of the gilt-wrought chairs, all these All this he had taken, and with the help of the gilt gilt 镀金金属的炫目的镀金的 wrought 溃败暴动混乱 Oh my God, it's really 混乱了 Gilt wrought chairs, light and easy to move, and had made an elaborate cave had made an elaborate cave in which elaborate 精深制作的
Elaborate.
elaborate cave 精心制作的 had made an elaborate cave in which he would hide himself from the Red Indians who were lurking behind the curtain. He put his ear to the floor. He put his ear to the floor and listened to the herd of buffaloes that raced across the prairie, 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 prairie,
prairie,
prairie 大草原。Presently, hearing the door open, he held his breath so that he might not be discovered. But a violent hand pulled away a chair, and the cushion fell down. You naughty boy. Miss Walkin will be cross with you. Hello, Emma, he said. The nurse bent over and kissed him, then began to shake out the cushion and put them back in their places. Am I to go home? He asked. Yes, I've come to fetch you. You've got a new dress on. It was in 1885. 1885. It was in 1885, and she wore she wore a bastos. Her gown was of black velvet with tight sleeves and a slope shoulder. Bastos. He wear a bastos. 腰垫。哦，裙撑。He she wore a bastos. 裙撑。Her gown was of black velvet, with tight sleeves and sloping shoulder, and the skirt had three large flounces. Flounces. Surely. Flounce. Let's see. 是以荷叶边，衣裙上的荷叶边装饰。Three 衣裙上的衣裙上的荷叶哦，荷叶边装饰。She wore a black bonnet. She wore a black bonnet with velvet strings. She hesitated. The question she had expected did not come, and so she could not give the answer she had prepared. Aren't you going to ask how your mom is? She sighed at length. Oh, I forgot. How's mom? How's mom? Now she was ready. Your mom is quite well and happy. Oh, I'm glad. Your mom's gone away. You won't ever see her anymore. Philip did not know what she meant. Why? Why not? Your mom's in heaven. She began to cry. And Philip, though he didn't quite understood, cried too. Emma was a tall, big-boned woman and a large figure. She came from Devonshire, and notwithstanding her many years of service in London, notwithstanding, oh no, notwithstanding, notwithstanding, he came from 尽管 notwithstanding. 尽管 she came from Devonshire, and notwithstanding her many years of service in London, had never lost the breadth of her accent. Her tears increased her emotion, and she pressed the little boy to her heart. She felt vaguely the pity. She felt vaguely the pity of that child, deprived of the only love in the world that is quite unselfish. She felt vaguely the pity that the child deprived of the only deprived剥夺 oh deprivation yes deprive 剥夺 I already learned it in the Little Princess. Deprive that child deprived of the only love in the world. That is, it seemed dreadful that he must be handed over to strangers. But in a little while, she pulled herself together. Your Uncle William is waiting to see you. Your Uncle William is waiting to see you, she said. Go and say goodbye to Miss Wilkin, and we'll go home. I don't want to say goodbye, he answered, instinctively anxious to hide his tears. Very well, run upstairs and get your hat. He fetched it, and when he came down, Emma was waiting for him in the hall. He heard the sound of voice in the study behind the dining room. He paused. He knew that Miss Wilkin and her sister were talking to friends, and it seemed to him he was 9 years old, that if he went in, they would be sorry for him. I think I'll go and say goodbye to Miss Watkin. I think you'd better go in and tell them I'm coming. Go in and tell them I'm coming to make the most of his opportunities. Emma knocked at the door and walked in. He heard her speak. Master Philip wants to say goodbye to you, miss. There was a sudden hush of the conversation, and Philip limped in. Henrietta Walking was a stout woman with a red face and dyed hair. 染发吗？那个时候就有染发吗？Dyed really dyed 真的是染发。And dyed hair. In those days, to dye the hair exacted comment. In those days, to dye the hair exacted a exacted comment. In those days, to dictate comment, and Philip had heard much gossip at home when his godmother changed color. She lived with an elder sister who had resigned herself contentedly, contentedly to old age. Two ladies whom Philip did not know were calling, and they looked at him curiously. My poor child, said Miss Wilkin, opening her arms. She began to cry. Philip understood now why she had not been in to luncheon and why she wore a black dress. She could not speak. I've got to go home, said Philip at last. He disengaged with he disengaged himself from Miss Wilkins's arm, and she kissed him again. Then he went to her sister and bade her goodbye too. Disengaged. Is it? Disengage. 战斗很辛苦的呢。He disengaged himself from Miss Wilkins's arms, and she kissed him again. Then he went to her sister and bade her goodbye. And bade her goodbye too. One of the strange lady asked if she might kiss him, and he gravely gave her permission. Though crying, he keenly enjoyed the sensation he was causing. Though crying, he keenly enjoyed the sensation he was causing. He would have been glad to stay a little longer to be made much of. He would have been glad to stay a little longer made much of, but felt they expected him to go. So he said that Emma was waiting for him. He went out of the room. Emma had gone downstairs to speak with a friend in the basement, and he waited for her on the landing. He heard Harrington's walking voice. His mother was my greatest friend. I can't bear to think that she's dead. You ought not to have gone to the funeral. Harrington, said her sister. I knew it would upset you. Then one of the strangers spoke. Poor little boy. It's dreadful to think of him quite alone in the world. I see he limps. Yes. Yes, he's got a club foot. It was such a grief to his mother. Then Emma came back. They called a hansom, and she told the driver what to go. When they reached the house, Mrs. Carey had died in. It was in a dreary, respectable street between Notting Hill Gate and High Street, Kingston. Emma led Philip into the drawing room. His uncle was writing letters of thanks for the wreaths which had been sent, one of them which had arrived too late for the funeral, lay in its cardboard box on the hall table. Here's Here's Master Philip, said Emma. Mr. Carey stood up slowly and shook hands with the little boy. Then, on second thoughts, he bent down and kissed his forehead. He was a man of somewhat less than average height, in, inclined to corpulence with his hair, inclined to corpulence, inclined to corpulence. Corpulence, 肥胖。
Corpulence.
Inclined to with his hair worn long, arranged over the scalp so as to conceal his baldness. Arranged over the scalp so as to conceal his baldness. He was clean shaved, with his hair worn long, arranged over the scalp so as to conceal his baldness. He was clean shaved. He was clean shaven. He was clean shaven. His features were regular. His features were regular, and it was possible to imagine that in his youth he had been good looking. His features were regular, and it was possible to imagine that in his been good looking. Oh, on his watch chain, she wore a gold cross. You are going to live with me now, Philip, said Mr. Carey. Shall you like it? Shall you like that? 2 years before, Philip had been sent down to stay at the uh, vicarage after an attack of chicken pox. Vicarage. Oh, that's what I think. Vicarage.
Vicarage.
Vicarage. Stay at the vicarage after an attack of chicken pox. But there remained with him a recollection of an attic and a large garden rather of his uncle and aunt. Yes, you must look upon me and your aunt Louisa as your father and mother. You must look upon me. Oh, you must look Louisa and Louisa as your father and mother. The child's mouth trembled a little. He reddened, but did not answer. Your dear mother left you in my charge. Mr. Curry had no great ease. Mr. Curry Mr. Curry had no great ease in expressing himself. When the news came Law was dying, he set off at once from London, but on the way thought of nothing but this disturbance, but the disturbance in his life that would be caused if her death forced him to undertake the care of her son. He was well over 50, and his wife, to whom he had been married for 30 years, was childless. Forward with any pleasure to the presence of a small boy who might be noisy and rough. He had never much liked his sister-in-law. "I'm going to take you down to Blackstable tomorrow," he said. "With Emma?" The child put his hand in hers, and she pressed it. "I'm afraid Emma must go away," said Mr. Curry. "Emma to come with me." Philip began to cry, and the nurse could not help crying too. Mr. Curry looked at them helplessly. "I think you'd better leave me alone with Mr. Philip for a moment." "Very good, sir." Though Philip clung to her, she released herself gently. Though Philip clung to her, she released herself gently. Mr. Curry took the boy on his knee and put his arm round him. "You mustn't cry," he said. "You are too old to have a nurse now. We must see about sending you to school." "I want Emma to come with me," the child repeated. "It costs too much money, Philip. Your father didn't leave very much, and I don't know what's become of it. You must look at every penny you spend." Mr. Curry had called the day before on the family solicitor. Philip's father was a surgeon in good practice, and his hospital appointments suggested an established, so that it was a surprise on his sudden death from blood that he had left his widow little more than his life insurance. What could be got for the lease of their house in Bruton Street, and what could be got for the lease of their house in Bruton. This was 6 months ago, and Mrs. Curry, already in delicate health, finding herself with child, had lost her head and accepted for the lease the first offer that was made. This was Mrs. Carey, already in delicate health, finding herself with child, had lost her head, and accepted for the lease the first offer that was made. She stored her furniture and at a rent which the parson, which the outrageous took a furnished house for a year, so that she might suffer from one inconvenience till her child was born. Took a furnished house for a year, so that she might suffer from no inconvenience till her child was born. But she had never been used to the management of money, and was unable to adapt her expenditure to her altered circumstance. 花销应该是 yes expenditure
expenditure,
expenditure was unable to adapt her expenditure to her altered circumstance. The little she had slipped through, the little she had slipped through her fingers in one way and another. The little she had slipped through her fingers in one way and another, so that now, when all expenses were much more than £2,000 remained to support the boy till he was able to earn his own living. It was impossible to explain all this to Philip, and he was sobbing still. You'd better go to Emma, Mr. Carris said, feeling that she could console the child better than anyone. Without a word, Philip slept off his uncle's knee, but Mr. Carris stopped him. We must go tomorrow, because on Saturday I've got to prepare my sermon, and you must tell Emma to get your things ready. Bring all your toys, and if you want anything to remember your father and mother by you can take one thing for each of them. Everything else is going to be sold. The boy slept out of the room. Mr. Curry was unused to work, and he turned to his correspondence with resentment. On one side of the desk was a bundle of and those filled him with irritation. One especially seemed preposterous. Immediately after Mrs. Carey's death, Emma had ordered from the florist masses of white flowers for the room in which the dead woman lay. It was a sheer waste of money. Emma took far too much upon herself. Even if there had been no financial necessity, he would have dismissed her. Yeah, it's a fair enough, but necessity.
necessity,
Financial necessity. Even if there had been no financial necessity, he would have dismissed her. But Philip went to her and hid her face in her bosom and wept as though his heart would break. And she, feeling that he was almost her own son, he had taken him when he was a month old. Oh, afterwards, she promised that she would come and see him sometimes, and that she would never forget him. And she told him that the country he was going to and about her own home in Derbyshire. Her father kept a turnpike on the high road that lead, and there was pigs in the stay, and there was a cow, and the cow had just have a calf. Tears and grew excited at the thought of his approaching journey. Turnpike, turnpike, I think. Turn, turnpike, turnpike on high road.
Turnpike.
Turnpike, 收税关卡，公路，收税关卡。哦，收税关卡，收税关卡。On the high road that led to Exeter, and there were pigs in the stay. Presently, she put him down, for there was much to be done, and he helped her to lay out his clothes on the bed. He went him into the nursery to gather up his toy, and in a little while he was playing happily. But at last he grew tired of being alone and went back to the bedroom, in which Emma was now putting his things into a big tin box. He remembered then that his uncle had said he might take something to remember his father and mother by. He told Emma and asked her what he should take. You'd better go into the drawing room and see what you fancy. Uncle William's there. Never mind that. They are your own things now. Philip went downstairs slowly and found the door open. Mr. Carey left the room. Philip walked slowly round. They had been in the house so short a time that there was little in it that had a particular interest to him. It was a strange room, and Philip saw nothing that struck his fancy. But he knew which were his mother's things and which belonged to the landlord, and presently fixed on a little clock that he had once heard his mother said she liked. With this, he walked again rather disconsolately upstairs. Outside the door of his mother's bedroom, he stopped and listened. Though no one had told him not to go in, he had a feeling that it would be wrong to do so. A little frightened, and his heart beat uncomfortably, but at the same time something impelled him. Something impelled but at the same time something impelled him to turn the handle. He turned it very gently, as if to prevent anyone within from hearing, and then slowly pushed the door open. He stood on the threshold for a while. Made threshold. He stood on the threshold for a moment before he had the courage to enter. He was not frightened now, but it seemed strange. He closed the door behind him. The blinds were drawn. The blinds were drawn, and the room, in the cold light of a January afternoon, was dark. On the dressing table were Miss Carey's brushes and the hand mirror. In a little tray were hairpins. There was a there was a photograph of himself on the chimney-piece, and one of his father. There was a photo There was a photograph of himself on the chimney-piece, and one of his father. He had often been in the room when his mother was not in it, but now it seemed different. There was something curious in the look of the chairs. The bed was made as though someone were going to sleep in it that night, and in a case on the pillow were a nightdress. Philip opened Philip opened a large cupboard filled with dresses and, stepping in, took as many of them as he could in his arm, and buried his face in them. Philip opened a large cupboard filled with dresses, and stepping in, took as much of them as he could in his arm, and buried his face in them. This smelt of the scent of his mother used. Then he pulled upon the drawers, filled with his mother's things, and looked at them, filled with his mother's things, and looked at them. There were lavender bags. There were lavender bags among the linens, and their scents were fresh and pleasant. The strangeness of the room left it, and it seemed to him that his mother had just gone out for a walk. She would be in presently and would come upstairs to have nursery tea with him, to feel her kiss on his lips. It was not true that he would never see her again. It was not it was not true simply because it was impossible. He climbed up on the bed and put his head on the pillow. He lay there quite still. Philip part, Philip parted from tears, but the journey to Blackstable. Philip parted from Emma with tears, but the journey to Blackstable amused him. And when they arrived, he was resigned and cheerful. He was resigned, 勉强接受 and cheerful. He was resigned and cheerful. 勉强接受，听从的，顺从的。应该是顺从的。He was resigned and cheerful. Blackstable was 60 miles Blackstable was 60 miles from London, giving their luggage to a porter. Giving their luggage to a porter, Mr. Carey set out to vicarage. To the vicarage. We check it again. Otherwise, vicarage. Just the vicarage. Vicarage.
Vicarage.
It took them little more than 50. It, it took them little more than 5 minutes, and when they reached it, Philip suddenly remembered the gate. It was red and five bars. It swung both ways on easy hinge. It swung both ways on easy hinges, and it was possible, though forbidden, to swing backward and forward on it. They walked through the garden to the front door. This was only used by visitors on Sundays. It was only used by visitors and on Sundays, and on special occasions, as when the vicar went up to London or came back. The traffic of the horse took place through a side door, and there was a back door as well for the gardener, and for beggars and the tramps. There was a back door as well. There was a back door as well for the gardener and for beggars and tramps. It was a fairly large house of yellow brick, with a red roof, built about 25 years before in an ecclesiastical style. It was a fairly large house of yellow brick, with a red roof, built up about 520 and a let's see. Oh, 基督 ecclesi exi
Ecclesiastical.
ecclesiastical exi
Ecclesiastical. Ecclesiastical.
ecclesiastical ecclesiastical ec- ex- ecclesiastical style. The front door was like a church porch. The front door was like a church porch, and the drawing room windows were Gothic. Gothic，哥特式。哦，哥特式的 Gothic 呀。OK，嗯，哥特式。我 Gothic. The front door was like a church porch, and the drawing room window were Gothic. Mrs. Curry, knowing by what train they were coming, waited in the drawing room and listened for the click of the gate. When she heard it, she went to the door. There's, there's Aunt Louisa, said Mr. Curry when he saw her. ran and gave her a kiss. Philip started to run. Philip started to run, awkwardly, awkwardly, trailing his club foot, trailing, trailing his club foot, and then stopped. Mrs. Carey was a little, shriveling, shriveled, shriveled woman of the same age as her husband. Shriveled woman，听忏悔的，干枯的。Shriveled. Oh, I think that's a meaning. 干巴的。
shriveled,
Shriveled. That's what I guess. So shriveled. Shriveled woman. Mr. Carey was a little shriveled woman of the same age as her husband, with a face extraordinarily filled with deep wrinkles and pale blue eyes. Her grey hair was arranged in ringlets. Her green hair were arranged in ringlets according to the fashion of her youth. Her grey hair were arranged in ringlets according to the fashion of her youth. She wore a black dress, and her only ornament was a gold chain, from which hung a cross. Oh, her only ornament was a gold chain, from which hung a cross. She had a shy manner and a gentle voice. Did you walk, William? Did you walk, William? She said, almost reproachfully, as she kissed her husband. I didn't think of it, he answered, with a glance at his nephew. It didn't hurt you to walk, Philip, did it? She asked the child. No, I always walk. He was a little surprised. He was a little surprised at their conversation. Aunt Louisa told him to come in, and they entered the hall. It was paved with red and yellow tiles, on which alternately were a Greek cross and the Lamb of God, on which alternately were a Greek cross and the Lamb of God, the Lamb of God. An imposing staircase led out of the hall. It was of polished pan. An imposing staircase led out of the hall. Staircase, imposing. Imposing 壮观的 An imposing staircase.楼梯 Oh, okay. An imposing staircase led out of the hall. It was polished pan. It was of polished pan, with a peculiar smell, and had been put in because fortunately when the church was reseated, enough wood remained over. The the ba- the baluster the balusters were decorated with emblems of the four evangelists. The baluster, ballast, ballast,
Baluster.
ballast。哦，它这个 I 总是发有一点 R 的音，ballast。栏杆柱。The baluster were decorated with emblem of the emblem 象征哦，象征 emblem. Let's see, is it pronounced? Yes, emblem.
Emblem.
徽章、标记或者是象征，或者是寓意的话，象征或者是寓意的话。Of the four average list， 四个吗？圣经新约书的作者。哦，圣经新约福音书的作者，福音传道者。For
Evangelist.
Of the four evangelists, I've had the stove lighted as I thought you would be cold after your journey, said Mrs. Carey. It was a large black stove that stood in the hall and was only lighted if the weather was very cold, and the wicker had a cold. It was not lighted if Mrs. Carey had a cold. Okay. If the weather was very bad and the wicker had a cold, it was not lighted if Mrs. Carey had a cold. Coal was expensive. Besides, Mary Ann, the maid, didn't like fire all over the place. If they want autumn fair, they must keep us. If they wanted autumn fair, they must keep a second girl. In the winter, Mr. and Mrs. Carey lived in the dining room so that one fair should do, and in the summer they could not get out of the habit, so the drawing room Mr. Carey on Sunday afternoon for his nap. But every Saturday he had a fair in the study so that he could write his sermon. Aunt Louisa took Philip upstairs and showed him into a tiny bedroom that looked out on the drive. Immediately in front of the window was a large tree, which Philip remembered now because the branches were so low that quite high up it. A small room for a small boy, said Mrs. Carey. You won't be frightened at sleeping alone. No. On his first visit to the vicarage, to the vicarage. He had come with his nurse, and Mrs. Curry had little to do with him. She looked at him now with some uncertainty. "Can you wash your own hands, or shall I wash them for you?" "I can wash myself," he answered firmly. "Well, I shall I shall look at them when you come down to tea," said Mrs. Curry. She knew nothing about children. After it was settled that Philip should come down to Blackstable, After it was settled that Philip should come down to Blackstable, Mrs. Curry had thought she should treat him. She was anxious to do her duty, but now he was there, she found herself just as shy of him as he was of her. She hoped he would not be noisy and naughty. Mm, Great. Had thought much, much how she should treat him. She was anxious to do her duty, but now he was he was there. She found herself shy of him, as he was of her. She hoped she hoped he would not be noisy and rough, because her husband did not like rough and noisy boys. Mrs. Curry made an excuse to leave Philip alone, but in a moment came back and knocked at the door. She asked him without coming in if he could pour out the water himself. Then this is such a nice. Then she went downstairs and rang the bell for tea room, large and well proportioned. The dining room, large and well proportioned, had windows on two sides of it, which heavy curtain of red wrap. There was a big table in the middle, and at one end an imposing ma I know this is a 红木 or 桃木 imposing sideboard with a looking glass in it. In one corner stood a harmonium. This is should at one end. The dining room, large and well proportioned. Proportion. 相称的 and well proportioned. 相称的，对比例的，抽比，相称的，对比例的。Had windows on two sides of each, which had of red wrap. There was a big table in the middle, and at one end an imposing sideboard with a long glass in it. In one corner stood a 一个乐器吗？Harm. Oh, really? Oh, I guess it's
Harmonium.
harmonium, 小风琴. Stood a harmonium. On each side of the fireplace were chairs. On each side of the fireplace were chairs covered in stamped leather. On each side of the fireplace were chairs covered in stamped leather, each with an antimacassar. On each side of the fireplace were chairs covered in stamped leather, each with an anti 反什么的反图啥呀
Antimacassar.
antimacassar
Antimacassar.
antimacassar 椅子罩子 then 椅子罩子 fireplace were chair covered in stamped leather, each with one had arms and was called the husband. The other had none and was called the wife. Mrs. Carey never sat in the armchair. She said she preferred a chair that was not too comfortable. Oh my God. I remember the sentence. She said she preferred a chair that was not too comfortable. There was always a lot to do, and if her chair had had arms, she might not be ready to leave it. Mr. Curry was making up the fare when Philip came in. Mr. Curry was making up the fare when Philip came in, and he pointed out to his nephew that there were two pokers. And he pointed out to his nephew that there were two pokers. One was large and bright and polished and unused, and was called the Vicar, and the other, which was much smaller and evidently and had evidently passed through many fare, was called the Curate. What are we waiting for? Said Mr. Curry. Two pokers. Oh, now I know what poker is. Yes. And he pointed out to his nephew that there were two pokers. One was large and bright and polished and unused, and was called the Vicar. The other, which was much smaller and had evidently passed through many fare, was called the Curate. What are we waiting for? Said Mr. Curry. I told Mary Ann to make you an egg. I thought you'd be hungry after your journey. Mrs. Curry thought the journey from London to Blackstable very tiring. She seldom travelled herself, for the living was only 300 a year, and when her husband wanted a holiday, since there was not money for two, he went by himself. He was very fond of church congresses and usually managed to go up to London once a year. and once he had been to Paris for the exhibition, and 2 or 3 times to Switzerland. Mary Ann brought in the egg, and they sat down. The chair was much too low for Philip, and for a moment neither Mr. Carey nor his wife knew what to do. "I will put some books under him," said Mary Ann. She took from the top of the harmonium. She took from the top of the harmonium the large Bible and the prayer book, from which the vicar was accustomed to read prayers, and put them on Philip's chair. "Oh, William!" "She can't sit on the Bible," said Mrs. Carey, in a shocked tone. "Could you get him some books out of the study?" Mr. Carey considered the question for an instant. "I don't think it matters." "Oh, really? I don't think it matters this once, if you put the prayer book on the top." Mary Ann: "Oh, okay. I don't think it matters this once, if you put the prayer book on top, Mary Ann," he said. "The Book of Common Prayer is the composition of men like ourselves. It has no claim to divine authorship. It's no claim to "I hadn't thought of that, William," said Philip. Perched himself on the books. "Oh, I don't think it matters this once, if you put the prayer's book on the top, Mary Ann. The Book of Common Prayer is the composition of men like ourselves. It has no claim to divine authorship." "I hadn't thought of that, William," said Aunt Louisa. Philip perched himself on the books. That's so funny. Philip perched himself on the books, and the vicar, having said grace, cut the top of his egg. That's interesting. Cut the top of his egg. "There," he said, handing it to Philip. "You can eat my top if you like." Philip would have liked an egg to himself, but he was not offered one, so took what he could. How have the chickens been laying?" asked the vicar. "Oh, they've been dreadful, only 1 or 2 a day." "How did you like that top, Philip?" asked his uncle. "Very much, thank you. You shall have another one on Sunday afternoon." Mr. Carey always had a boiled egg at tea on Sunday, so that he might be fortified for the evening service. Fortified, I think I know what it means. Let's check. Fortify. 增加营养，增强营养。Yes. 增加体力。So that he might be fortified for the evening service. Philip came gradually to know the people he was to live with, and by fragments of conversation, some of it not meant for his ear, learned a good deal both about himself and about his dead parents. Philip's father had been much younger than the vicar of Blackstable. After a brilliant career at St. Luke's Hospital, he was put on the staff and presently began to earn considerable sums. He spent it freely. When the parson set about restoring his church and asked his brother for a subscription, he was surprised by receiving a couple of £100. Subscription. Subscription. 捐赠哦，果然是捐款。订阅。And asked his brother for a subscription. He was surprised by receiving a couple of £100. Mr. Curry, thrifty by inclination and economical by necessity, thrifty by inclination and economic by necessity. 这个词老是不好。necessity.
Necessity.
By necessity. Thrifty. 不是 thrifty.
Thrifty.
节俭的 thrifty. 节俭 Thrifty by inclination and economic by necessity, accepted it with mangled feelings. He was nervous. Yeah. He was nervous. Is it nervous? Envy. And yes. Let's see. Yes.
Envious.
He was envious of his brother because he could afford to give so much, pleased for the sake of his church, and vaguely irritated by the generosity which seemed almost ostentatious. 奢侈 ostentatious 炫耀 OK not 讲
Ostentatious. Ostentatious.
complicated human feeling. I'm vaguely irritated by the generosity which seemed almost awesome. Then Henry Carey married a beautiful girl, but penniless, and often with no near relation, but of good family. And there was an array of fine friends at the wedding. And I already 列对一大批。And there was an array of fine friends at the wedding. The parson, on his visits to her when he came to London, held himself with reserve. He felt shy with her. He resented her great beauty. Really? She dressed more magnificently than became the wife of a hard-working surgeon, and the charming furniture of her house, the flowers among which she lived even in winter, suggested an extravagance which he deployed. Extravagance. Oh, this is a searcher. Extravagance.
extravagance, extravagance,
Extravagance.
extravagance,
Extravagance. Search. Search. 挥霍 suggested an extravagance which she deplored. He deplored. Deplored. He heard her talk of entertainment she was going to, and as he told his wife on getting home again, accept hospitality without making some return. He had seen grapes in the dining room that must have cost at least 8 shillings a pound, and at luncheon he had been given asparagus 2 months before it was ready in the vicarage garden. Now all he had anticipated was come to pass. The vicar felt the satisfaction of the prophet who saw fire and brimstone consume the city which would not mend its way to his warning. Now all he had anticipated. Anticipate. Now all he had anticipated was come to pass. The vicar felt the action of the prophet who saw fire and brimstone consume the city which would not mend its way to his warning. Was particularly penniless, and what was the good of his mother's fine friends now? Yeah, He heard that his father's extra, extravagance was really criminal. Extra, extravagant, extravagance, extravagance, extravagance. The what was the good and what was the good of his and what was the good of his mother's fine friends now? He heard that his father's extravagance, extravagance, extravagance was really criminal, and it was a mercy, that Providence had seen fit to take his dear mother to itself. And it was a mercy that Providence had seen fit to take his dear mother to itself.天，哦，上帝 ，Providence，上帝，天意。And it was a mercy that Providence had seen fit to take his dear mother to itself. He had no more idea of money than a child. When Philip had been a week, an accident happened which seemed to irritate his uncle very much. One morning he found on the breakfast table a small packet which had been sent on by post from the late Mrs. Carey's house in London. It was addressed to her. When the parson opened it, he found a letter of Mrs. Carey. They showed the head and shoulders only. And his hair was more plainly done than usual, low on the forehead, which gave her an unusual look. The face was thin and worn, but no illness could impair the beauty of oh. But no illness could impair. There was in the large dark eye a sadness which Philip did not remember. The first sight of the dead woman gave Mr. Carroll a little shock, but this was quickly followed by perplexity.
Perplexity.
Perplexity. But this was quickly followed by perplexity. The photographs seemed quite recent, and he could not imagine who had ordered them. Do you know anything about this, Philip? I remember Mama said she had been taken. He answered. Miss Walkin scolded her. She said, I wanted the boy to have something to remember me by when he grows up. Mr. Curry looked at Philip for an instant. The child spoke in a clear treble. Treble 高音 third treble 高音的。Oh, she said, I want the boy to have something to remember me by when he grows up. The child spoke in a clear treble. He recalled the words, but they meant nothing to him. You'd better take one of the photographs and keep it in your room, said Mr. Carey. I'll put the other away. He sent one to Miss Wonkin, and he wrote and explained how they came to be taken. And he sent one to Miss Wonkin, and she wrote and explained how they came to be taken. One day, Mrs. Carey was lying in bed, but she was feeling a little better than usual, and the doctor in the morning had seemed hopeful. Emma had taken the child out, were downstairs in the basement. Suddenly, Mrs. Carey felt desperately alone in the world. A great fear seized her that she would not recover from the confinement which she was. Wait a minute.
Confinement.
前进，居然是一个词啊！分娩，前进 which she was expecting in a fortnight. Her son was 9 years old. How could he be expected to remember her? She could not bear to think that he would grow up and forget her utterly. And she had loved him so passionately. So passionately, because he was weakly and deformed, and because he was her child. No photograph of herself taken since her marriage, and that was 10 years before. She wanted her son to know what she looked like at the end. He could not forget her then, not forget utterly. She knew that if she called her maid and told her to up, the maid would prevent her, and perhaps send for the doctor. And she had not the strength nor to struggle or argue, and began to dress herself. She had been on her back so long that her legs gave way beneath her, and then the sole of her feet tingled so that She could hardly bear to put them on to the ground, but she went on. She was unused to doing her own hair, and when she raised her arms and began to brush it, she felt faint. She could never do it as her maid did. It was beautiful hair, very fine, and of a deep rich gold. Her eyebrow was straight and dark. She put on a black skirt, but those the bodies of the evening dress, which she liked best. It was of a white damask, which was fashionable in those days. She looked at herself in the glass. Her face was very pale, but her skin was clear. She had never had much color, and this had always made the redness of her beautiful most emphatic. She could not restrain a sob, but she could not afford to be sorry for herself. She was feeling already desperately tired, and she put on the furs which Henry had given her the Christmas before. She had been so proud of them and so happy then, and slipped downstairs with beating heart. She got swiftly out of horse and drove to a photographer, and slipped downstairs with beating heart. She got swiftly out of the horse and drove to a photographer. She paid for a dozen. She was obliged to ask for a glass of water in the middle of the sitting, and the assistant seeing she was ill, suggested that but she insisted on staying till the end. At last it was finished, and she drove back again to the dingy little house in Kensington, which she hated with all her heart. It was a horrible house to die in. She found the front door open, and when she drove up, the maid and Emma ran down the steps to help her. They had been frightened when they found her room empty. At first they thought she must have gone to Miss Walkin, and the cook was sent round. Miss Walkin came back with her, and was waiting anxiously in the drawing room. She came downstairs now, full of anxiety and reproaches. But the exertion, had been more than Mrs. Carey was fit for. Exertion.
Ex-
But the exertion had been more than Mrs. Carey was fit for, and when the occasion for firmness no longer existed, she gave way. She fell heavily into Emma's arm and was carried upstairs. She remained unconscious. She remained unconscious for a time that seemed incredibly long to those that watched her, and the doctor, hurriedly sent for, did not come. It was the next day, when she was a little better, that Miss Wonkin got some explanation out of her. Philip was playing on the floor of his mother's bedroom, and neither of the ladies paid attention to him. He only understood vaguely what they were talking about, and he could not have said why those words remained in his memory. I wanted the boy to have something to remember me by when he grows up. I can't make out why she ordered a dozen. I can't make out why she ordered a dozen, said Mr. Carey. Two would have done. One day was very like another at the vicarage. One day was very like another at the vicarage. Soon after breakfast, Mary Ann brought in the Thames. Harry shared it with two neighbors. He had it from 10 till 1. When the gardener took it over to Mr. Alley at the Limes, with whom it remained till 7. Then it was taken to Miss Brooke at the Manor House, who, since she got it late, had the advantage of keeping it. In summer, Mrs. Carey, when she was making jam, often asked her for a copy to cover the pot with.